There is a photograph that survives from the winter of 1934. In it, a young woman holds an infant against her chest. She is smiling. She does not know, she cannot know, that within a matter of months, she will be marched down a hillside in a Chinese village, with her hands bound behind her back, and that the God she has already surrendered everything to will ask her to prove it. She had written the words years before, long before she ever met the man who would die beside her. She had written them alone, in prayer, as a private covenant no one was meant to read. And the words were these, that she gave up all her own plans and purposes, all her own desires and hopes, and accepted his will for her life. She surrendered herself, she wrote, utterly and forever to the Lord. She could not have known that heaven would take her at her word. This is not, in the end, a story about how two people died. The world already has too many stories about how people die. This is a story about what two people carried while they lived. A message so simple and so total that it terrified the comfortable and comforted the terrified. It is the story of a seed that was buried in Chinese soil in the coldest part of the year, and that has been growing, quietly and stubbornly, ever since. But before the hillside, before the soldiers, before the smiling photograph, there were two ordinary young people who were not remarkable in any way the world measures remarkable. And to understand what God did through them, you have to understand how little they brought to him. John Cornelius Stam was born in the year 1907 in Paterson, New Jersey, into a family where the gospel was not a Sunday decoration, but the air the household breathed. His father was a Dutch immigrant who ran a business and preached in the open air, standing on street corners in a factory town, calling passing strangers to repentance. John grew up watching a man who was not ashamed, and yet, for all of that, John was not a boy on fire. He was quiet. He was steady. He was, by most accounts, unremarkable. The kind of young man who could have lived and died in that New Jersey town and never been mentioned again. He worked in business for a time after school. He was practical. He was not, in his own estimation, anything special. But somewhere in those young years, a question got hold of him and would not let go. It was the same question that has haunted every soul that God has ever used. Not what can I do for God, but what is God worth? If Christ is who he says he is, if the cross means what it says it means, then no life held back could possibly be enough. John began to feel the pull of the mission field, and specifically of China, that vast and closed and dangerous country where a man named Hudson Taylor had gone a generation before with nothing but faith and a burden for souls no one else seemed to carry. To prepare, John came to Chicago, to the Moody Bible Institute, the school founded by the shoe salesman turned evangelist whose own story this channel has told before. It was there, in that building dedicated to training ordinary men and women for gospel work, that John Stam's quiet life intersected with the life of a young woman who had already been marked by China long before she ever chose it. Her name was Elizabeth Alden Scott. Everyone called her Betty. She'd been born in the year 1906, and she had grown up in China, the daughter of Presbyterian missionaries who had given their own lives to that same soil. So, China was not an abstraction to Betty. It was not a romantic idea she had read about in a magazine. It was the smell of the streets she had walked as a child, the faces of the people her parents had served, the language in her ears before she could form full sentences in English. When Betty spoke of a burden for the lost of China, she was not speaking of strangers. She was speaking of home. Betty had come to America for her education, and she too found her way to the Moody Bible Institute. And it was there, in that shared calling, that she and John met. But here is what must be understood about Betty Scott, because it is the key to everything that follows. Before she ever fell in love with John Stam, she had already fallen, completely and without reserve, into the hands of God. While still a student, Betty wrote out a prayer of consecration. a covenant between herself and her Lord. She was not writing it for publication. She was not performing. She was a young woman alone with God, putting into words what her heart had already decided. And in that prayer, she laid down everything a human being naturally clings to. She laid down her own plans. She laid down her own hopes for her future. She laid down the right to choose her own path, her own comfort, her own safety. She asked God to fill her with His Holy Spirit, to use her as He wished, to send her where He wished, and this is the phrase that would echo across the rest of her short life, to do with her as He wished, at whatever cost. Read those words slowly, at whatever cost. She wrote them as a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, with love and marriage and children and decades she surely imagined stretching out before her. She wrote at whatever cost, the way we all write it, meaning it, and yet not knowing what it would come to mean. That is the nature of surrender. We sign the blank page. We do not get to read what God will write on it. This is the heart of what Seeds of Revival exists to say. God does not use great men and women. He uses surrendered ones. Betty Scott was not extraordinary. She was ordinary, in the way John was ordinary, in the way you and I are ordinary. What set her apart was not her gift. It was her yieldedness. She had opened her hands, and once a hand is truly open, God can put anything into it, or take anything out of it. John and Betty were drawn together not first by romance, but by a shared and total commitment to Christ and to China. Their letters from those years reveal two people who were determined, above all else, that their love for each other would never compete with their love for their Lord. John himself wrote of his conviction that they must both be willing to follow God's leading, even if it meant being apart, even if it meant China took one and not the other. They were in love, yes, but their love was built on a foundation deeper than each other. It was built on the one who had bought them both. And so they went. John sailed for China first in the autumn of 1932, sent out by the China Inland Mission. The same mission Hudson Taylor had founded on the radical principle that they would never ask any human being for money, but would trust God alone to supply every need. Betty followed. And in the city of Xinan, in the following year, they were married. The photographs from that day show two young faces full of hope, standing at the beginning of what they surely believed would be a long life of service together. But China in the 1930s was not a safe place to be a Christian, and it was becoming less safe by the month. The country was being torn apart. Warlords ruled whole regions. Banditry was everywhere. And rising through the chaos, gathering strength, was the communist movement. Armies of men who saw in the foreign missionary not a servant of the poor, but an agent of the enemy, a symbol of the old world they intended to burn down entirely. To be a Christian missionary in the path of that advance was to carry a target you could not put down. The Stams knew the danger. They did not pretend it away. And still, they went inland, to a remote station in the province of Anhui, to a town called Qingte, far from the coast, far from safety, far from any help that could reach them quickly if the darkness came close. Why? Because that is where the lost were. Because a surrendered life does not calculate the odds before it obeys. Because they had already answered the question, what is Christ worth? And the answer they had given did not have an escape clause in it. In the autumn of 1934, a daughter was born to them. They named her Helen Priscilla. And so now there were three: a young father, a young mother, and a baby just a few months old, living in a remote town in a country sliding into war, holding on to nothing but the faithfulness of God. If these old words are reaching your heart the way they reach theirs, take a moment to subscribe, because there are more forgotten voices still waiting to be heard. Then, in the first week of December, The darkness came. The communist forces swept into the region far faster than anyone had expected. There was almost no warning. On the morning of December the 8th, 1934, soldiers entered Qingte, and John Stam did what a man of his character would do. He did not run and abandon others. He remained. When the soldiers came to the mission house, he received them with courtesy. He offered them tea. He treated the men who would soon kill him, not with panic or contempt, but with the dignity of one who genuinely believed that even these soldiers were souls for whom Christ had died. They took the family captive. And John, understanding the gravity of what was happening, was permitted to write a letter to the mission authorities. That letter survives, and it is one of the most remarkable documents to come out of that entire dark chapter. Because there is no panic in it. He calmly reported that they had been taken prisoner, that the communists were demanding an enormous ransom for their release, and that he did not know what the outcome would be. And then he wrote the words that reveal what was actually holding him up in that moment. He committed the situation to God. He asked that the peace of God, which passes all understanding, would keep their hearts and minds. And he closed, a young father, a young husband, a prisoner of men who meant to kill him, by writing that whatever happened, he wanted God's will to be done, whatever happened. There it is again. The same surrender Betty had written into her prayer as a student, now written by her husband with a rifle at his back. This was not bravado. Bravado breaks under real pressure. This was something else. This was the fruit of two lives that had already, years earlier, laid themselves down. The dying was not the surrender. The dying was only the moment the world finally got to see a surrender that had happened long before, in private, on their knees. They were forced to march. And here, the historical record gives us a detail almost too tender to bear. Baby Helen Priscilla, only a few months old, was with them. As the soldiers led John and Betty away toward the place of execution, the child was hidden. Some accounts say Betty concealed her among their belongings. What is certain is that the baby was left behind, alive, in the town, while her parents were marched to their deaths. A mother, in the last hours of her life, doing the one thing left to her, securing the survival of her child, and then walking on toward the sword without her. On the 9th of December, in a place near the town of Miao-Sheo, John and Betty Stam were executed. They were led down a hill, past onlookers, and there they were put to death by the sword, beheaded, killed for no crime except that they had come, in the name of Jesus Christ, to a people who did not want them. John was 27 years old. Betty was 28. It was reported that when a local Chinese Christian shopkeeper pleaded for their lives, he too was seized, and he too died with them rather than deny the faith he shared. The seed was already multiplying, even in the moment it fell into the ground. And what of the baby? For 2 days, in a nation collapsing into chaos, in a town abandoned by the fleeing soldiers, an infant lay hidden and alone. No food, no mother, no father. By every natural expectation, Helen Priscilla should have died. But a Chinese evangelist named Mr. Lo, who knew the family, made his way through the danger to search for the Stams. He found them dead. And then, in the empty mission house, he heard something. A cry. He found the baby, hungry, cold, but alive, wrapped as her mother had left her, with a little money her parents had tucked into her blankets to provide for whoever might find her. A mother's last provision, folded around a child she would never hold again. Mr. Lowe and his wife carried that baby to safety across 100 miles of dangerous country, hidden in a basket, and delivered her to her grandparents. The child the world came to call the miracle baby survived. And in her survival, God preached a sermon louder than any pulpit. The soldiers had come to erase these Christians from the earth, and what they left behind was a living child, carried to safety by a Chinese believer, the very kind of soul John and Betty had given their lives to reach, proof that the church they died to plant was already alive and already caring for its own. Now, here is where we must ask the question this channel always asks. What was the seed? Because two young people dying in an obscure Chinese village should, by every worldly calculation, have been the end of the story. A tragedy, a waste, a footnote. That is what the enemy intended. That is always what the enemy intends. But that is not what happened. When the news of John and Betty Stam's death reached America, something broke open. The story of this young couple, their youth, their baby, their calm surrender, the letters that revealed hearts at peace in the face of death, spread through churches and colleges and mission societies across the entire country. And it did not produce despair. It produced fire. Young men and women who read the story of the Stams did not conclude that missions were too dangerous. They concluded the opposite. They concluded that if John and Betty could give everything, so could they. Across America and beyond, a wave of young people offered themselves for missionary service, many of them saying plainly that it was the death of the Stams that had called them. The blood of these two became, exactly as it always has in the history of the church, the seed of others. The words the ancient Christian writer Tertullian spoke of the early church proved true again in the 20th century. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Two young people fell into the ground in Anhui, and out of that ground rose a harvest they never saw. A generation of laborers sent into the very field where they had died. And this is the message of the Stams that still reaches us. It is the message that stands over their whole short lives, and it is drawn from the words of the Apostle Paul in the letter to the Philippians, chapter 1, verse 20, where he wrote that it was his earnest expectation and hope that Christ would be magnified in his body, whether by life or by death. Whether by life or by death. That was the seed Betty planted in her prayer as a student. That was the seed John planted in his final letter as a prisoner. It was not a message about how to die well. It was a message about how to belong to Christ so completely that death loses its power to change your allegiance. If Christ is magnified whether you live or die, then the enemy has nothing left to threaten you with. He can take your comfort, your safety, your plans, your body. And he cannot take the one thing that matters, which is that Christ will be glorified either way. That is the fire the Stams carried. Not the fire of great preaching. They were not great preachers. Not the fire of long ministry. Their ministry was cut off before it had truly begun. The fire they carried was the fire of whatever cost. And that fire is the rarest thing in the modern church. So here is the question that still reaches us, across nearly 100 years and half a world away. Betty Scott wrote her prayer of total surrender as a young woman with everything to lose. She signed the blank page and let God fill it in. Would we? We live in an age of the Christian faith that has learned to want Christ without cost, to want the comfort of grace without the claim of the cross, to sing about surrender on Sunday and reclaim our lives by Monday. We have made following Jesus into something safe. But there is nothing in the New Testament and nothing in the life of John and Betty Stam that permits us to believe our faith will cost us nothing. The seed they planted did not die. It is still growing. The question is whether the same seed has ever truly been planted in us. Have we opened our hands? Have we written our own blank page and handed it to God, not knowing what He will write on it, but trusting the one who holds the pen? Or are we still holding on, still calculating the cost, still asking God to bless the life we have already decided to keep for ourselves? John and Betty Stam were ordinary. That is the whole point. God does not use great men and women. He uses surrendered ones. And He is still looking in this generation for hands that are open. If this story stirred your heart, leave a like, so that this message can reach more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to Seeds of Revival for more stories of forgotten preachers, burning sermons, and lives poured out for Christ. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and tell us which voice from the old paths should rise again in the next video. Amy Carmichael, who gave her whole life to rescue children in India. Adoniram Judson, who buried a family in Burma and would not turn back. Or Eric Liddell, the Olympic runner who laid down his fame and died in a Chinese prison camp. Cast your vote, and we will let the next seed rise. If this story stirred something in your heart, take a moment to leave a like. It helps this message reach another soul who may need to hear it. And if you want to keep walking these old paths with us, subscribe to Seeds of Revival, a place for forgotten preachers, burning sermons, and historic awakenings. There are many more voices still waiting to be heard. Before you go, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and which voice from the old paths should rise again in the next video. Until the next story, keep looking to Him.